I want to say something honest before I say anything else. And the honest thing is that the title I chose for what I want to tell you is not quite accurate. And I chose it anyway because the inaccuracy points toward something true in a way that the accuracy would not have pointed toward as directly. The title says Never Get a Girlfriend Again, and what I actually mean is never get a girlfriend again in the specific and particular way that I got one, which was the way of a man who was lonely and who was not ready and who moved with a speed and a completeness that the loneliness was driving and that the readiness was not supporting, and who produced, through the combination of the loneliness and the speed and the unreadiness, a situation that cost him significantly and that cost the woman involved more than she deserved to be cost, and that I want to tell you about with the specific honesty that the telling requires. My name is Bernard. I am 78 years old, and I want to tell you about the 18 months that began 3 years after my wife died, and what I learned from them and what I wish I had understood before them. My wife's name was Eleanor. We were married for 44 years, and she died in 2017 of the lung cancer that she had been managing with remarkable grace for 2 years before the managing became impossible. And the dying was as good as dying can be in the sense that it was not sudden and that it allowed the time for the conversations that sudden death does not allow, and that I had with Eleanor in the last months of her life with the specific and concentrated attention of a man who understood that the conversations were finite and that the finitude made them precious in a way that the preceding 44 years of conversations, however genuine and however valued, had not quite been precious in. She died in October of 2017, and I was 72 years old, and I had been with Eleanor since I was 28. And the world that the dying left me in was the world of a man who had not lived as a single person since his 20s, and who had no current experience of what being a single person in his 70s required, or how to do it, or whether the doing of it was something he was equipped for. I was not equipped for it. I want to say that plainly because the plain saying of it is the honest version, and the honest version is what I need to give you for what follows to make sense. I was not equipped for solitude in the specific way of someone who had not practiced it for 44 years, and who discovered in the first months after Eleanor died that the absence of another person in the daily life produced a quality of interior experience that was not only the grief of the specific person lost, but something larger and more disorienting, the loss of the structure that the shared life had provided, and the discovery that the self without that structure was less clearly defined than the self within it had been. I managed the first year with the specific and mechanical efficiency of grief, moving through the days with the forward motion that the practical requirements of the daily life and the children and the estate and the various obligations that the dying produces in its aftermath provide, and the motion was useful and was also the mechanism by which I was avoiding the genuine and sustained encounter with the solitude that the year required and that I was not ready to have. The second year was harder. The practical requirements had been addressed, and the forward motion had slowed, and the solitude was more present and less managed. And I discovered in the second year that my primary strategy for managing the interior difficulty of being alone was to fill the alone with activity and with the company of other people in the social ways available to a man of my age and circumstance, and the filling was genuine and was also insufficient because what I was managing was not the general condition of being without company, but the specific condition of being without the particular and intimate company of a person who knew me well enough to be in a room with me without performing, and who I could be in a room with without performing either. And the social filling did not address the specific condition because it was providing the general thing. and the general thing was not what the specific condition required. I met a woman named Vivian at the end of the second year. She was 69 years old, a retired teacher who had been divorced for 8 years, and who was, in the way that I was attracted to at that particular moment in my particular condition, warm and socially engaged and easy to be with in the specific way that easy to be with means when you are a man who has been without genuine intimate company for 2 years and who is therefore interpreting the ease of the early connection as evidence of the depth of it. The ease of early connection is not evidence of the depth of it. That is the first thing I want you to understand from what I am going to tell you, and I want you to understand it before the early connection presents itself to you so that you can hold the understanding when the ease arrives, and the ease is very persuasive, and the understanding will need to be held firmly to be held at all. Vivian and I were together for 18 months. I want to tell you what I did in those 18 months that constitutes the mistake I am describing, because the mistake was not the meeting of Vivian or the beginning of a relationship with her, both of which were potentially reasonable things that a man in my position might reasonably do. The mistake was the speed and the completeness with which I organized myself around the relationship and around Vivian specifically, the speed with which I moved from the meeting of her to the structuring of my daily life around her presence in a way that was not the gradual and appropriate deepening of a genuine connection, but the urgent and disproportionate response of a man who was using the connection to solve a problem that the connection was not designed to solve. I introduced Vivian to my children within 3 months. My children, a son named Robert and a daughter named Susan, received Vivian with the specific and cautious warmth of people who love their father and who are uncertain about what they are being asked to receive and whether the receiving of it is what their father actually needs or what his grief is currently presenting as what he needs. And the distinction between those two things was something my children could see from the outside and that I could not see from the inside, because the inside was organized around the relief of the not being alone that Vivian was providing, and the relief was making the seeing very difficult. I talked about Eleanor less. I want to say that specifically because I understand now that the reduction in my talking about Eleanor was not the evidence of healing that I took it to be at the time, but was the evidence of suppression, the pushing of the Eleanor grief into the space that the Vivian relationship was filling. And the pushing did not process the grief, but only relocated it. And the relocated grief continued to do its work in ways that the Vivian relationship was too new and too much the mechanism of the avoidance to address. Vivian was a perceptive woman. I want to say that because she understood before I understood what was happening, which is the specific and painful position of being the person in a relationship who can see the truth of the relationship more clearly than the other person can see it, and who must decide whether to name what they see or to wait for the other person to arrive at the seeing themselves. Vivian waited for a year, and then she named it in a conversation that I was not ready for and that I received with the specific and defensive resistance of a man whose readiness to hear a particular truth is significantly behind the truth's readiness to be told. She said that she felt she was in a relationship with a man who had not finished being married to his wife, and who was using the relationship with her to avoid the finishing, and that the avoiding was not something she was willing to continue to be the mechanism for, because she deserved to be chosen rather than used, and that what I was doing, however genuinely and however kindly, was using her. I want to tell you how I received that, because the receiving of it is the instructive part. I received it with anger first, which was the defensive response of a man who has been told an uncomfortable truth, and who is not yet ready to stop being defended against it. Then with the specific and interior quiet of a man sitting with something that has landed somewhere real. Then with the understanding that she was right in the specific and comprehensive way that accurate observations are right, and the understanding produced in me the grief that I had been avoiding across the 18 months of the relationship, and that arrived in the conversation with Vivian with the full weight of the 2 years of avoidance added to the original weight of the loss. Vivian and I ended the relationship in the month after that conversation. She was generous in the ending, and I was genuinely sorry. And the genuine sorry was the first genuinely present emotion I had felt in the relationship, rather than the performed and managing emotion that the avoidance had been producing in the place of the genuine thing. I spent the following year doing what the 2 years after Eleanor's death had not done, which was to sit with the solitude without the management strategies and to let the grief be the size it actually was, without the relationship as the container that was keeping it smaller than it was and that was preventing it from processing in the way that grief must process, to actually move through you rather than staying in the relocated position that the management has placed it in. The year was hard. I want to say that without the softening that makes hard things sound more manageable than they are, because the hard is the honest description, and the honest description is what prepares you for the actual thing rather than the easier version. It was the year of sitting with the Eleanor grief in its full and actual size, and letting it do what it needed to do, and discovering in the doing of it that the doing of it was survivable, and that the surviving of it was the only path to the other side of it, and that the other side of it was where the genuine readiness for a new relationship lived. I am not in a relationship now. I want to tell you that because I think the honest conclusion of this account is not the inspiring story of a man who learned his lesson and then found the right relationship, but the more modest and more useful story of a man who learned his lesson and who is now genuinely alone and genuinely at peace with the genuinely alone in a way that he was not at peace with it at 72, and that is itself the most important thing the 18 months produced. I am at peace with Eleanor's death in a way that the avoidance was preventing. I am at peace with my own solitude in a way that the urgency of the Vivian relationship was preventing. I am at peace with the specific and daily life of a man of 78 who lives alone, and who has found in the genuine inhabiting of the solitude something that the management of it was not providing, which is the actual self that the management was covering, and that the covering was preventing him from knowing as fully as the knowing of it turns out to require. If you are recently widowed and you are feeling the specific and urgent loneliness that the absence of 40 years of intimate company produces, I want to tell you what Vivian told me and what I was not ready to hear when she told me, and what I want to give you before you are in the position of needing to hear it. Grieve first, not as the postponement of life, but as the condition for its genuine continuation. Sit with the solitude until the sitting is not avoidance, but genuine presence, until you are in the solitude rather than managing it, until the readiness for another person comes from the fullness of the alone rather than from its emptiness. The fullness takes longer than the loneliness wants it to take. The loneliness is not a reliable guide to the readiness. Do not let the loneliness make the decision that the readiness is supposed to make. Eleanor deserved the grief. Vivian deserved the genuine readiness. I gave both of them something less than what they deserved. Do better than I did. Grieve first. The rest comes after.